In the depths of eternity, before the first star ignited its flame, a question burns through the corridors of time that will shatter everything you believed about the greatest war ever fought. Where was Jesus when perfection chose rebellion? Where was the Creator when his most magnificent creation turned against him? The answer lies hidden in the shadows of heaven itself, waiting to be unveiled. Picture this: the eternal throne room pulsing with divine authority, where two beings share glory that predates the birth of galaxies. The Father and the Son, existing in perfect communion since before time had meaning. In this sacred realm, among flames that never consume and light that casts no shadows, walks a being of such breathtaking beauty that angels pause in their worship to marvel at his splendor. Lucifer. The name itself once meant bearer of light, but tonight, that light will become the darkest shadow ever cast across creation. He moves through the heavenly courts with grace that surpasses understanding, his form adorned with precious stones that catch and reflect the glory of God himself. Emeralds, diamonds, sapphires, and gold worked by divine hands into a tapestry of perfection that has never been equaled. But here lies a truth that will make your soul tremble. It was Jesus who created him. Every facet of Lucifer's beauty, every measure of his wisdom, every ounce of his power flowed from the creative word of the Son. The same Jesus who would one day walk dusty Palestinian roads and feel thorns pierce. His brow was the architect of the being who would become his greatest enemy. Can you fathom the cosmic irony? The Creator forming his own adversary, knowing full well what that perfect heart would choose. Jesus spoke Lucifer into existence with complete awareness of every rebellious thought that would poison that magnificent mind. He crafted those wings that covered the throne, knowing they would one day spread in defiance. He granted that wisdom, knowing it would twist into pride. This was no accident of creation. This was no divine miscalculation. When Jesus formed Lucifer in the fires of eternity, he saw the end from the beginning. He witnessed the 5 declarations of rebellion before they echoed through heaven. He observed the war that would split the celestial realm before the first sword was drawn. And still, he created him. The cherub held a position no other angel could claim. He was the anointed guardian, the one who covered the very throne of God with his presence. While seraphim cried, "Holy, holy," Lucifer walked among the fiery stones of the most sacred place. While other angels served from a distance, this magnificent being had direct access to the source of all existence. He was, in every sense, the masterpiece of angelic creation. Yet in the depths of that perfect heart, something impossible was stirring. A thought that should never exist in a sinless being began to take root. As Lucifer gazed upon his own reflection in the precious stones that adorned his being, he saw beauty that rivaled creation itself. As he contemplated his wisdom, he found knowledge that seemed to match the divine mind. As he considered his position, he discovered power that whispered of equality with God. The transformation was subtle at first, like the smallest crack in a perfect crystal. Who was watching as perfection began to corrode from within? Who observed as the first sin took shape in a heart that had never known corruption? Jesus. The Creator stood witness as his masterpiece began to unravel, not with surprise, but with the terrible knowledge of one who sees all things. Every rebellious thought that flickered through Lucifer's consciousness was known to Jesus before it fully formed. Every moment of growing pride, every flash of envy, every whisper of ambition, all observed by the one who had granted the very capacity for such thoughts. The Son watched as love transformed into lust for power, as worship warped into self-exaltation, as the guardian of the throne began to covet the throne itself. And Jesus did not intervene. This truth cuts deeper than any sword ever forged. The Creator allowed his most perfect creation to choose its own destruction. Why? Because forced love is not love at all. It is merely programming. Jesus had created beings capable of genuine affection, which meant they were also capable of genuine rejection. The gift of free will carried with it the terrible possibility of choosing evil over good, rebellion over submission, self over service. The corruption spread like poison through crystal. Lucifer began to question why he should bow when his own glory seemed so magnificent. Why should his wisdom be submitted when he understood so many divine mysteries? Why should his strength serve when he could command? The questions multiplied, each one driving a deeper wedge between the creature and his creator. Then came the moment when thought became intention, when private rebellion prepared to become public declaration. Lucifer made his choice, and the universe held its breath. But where was Jesus in that pivotal instant? He was exactly where he had always been, on the throne, sustaining all things by the word of his power, allowing justice to unfold while mercy prepared for its greatest demonstration. The stage was set for the most catastrophic war in cosmic history, and every move had been foreseen by the one who would ultimately transform the greatest tragedy into the foundation of eternal victory. The impossible had happened. In the heart of perfection, iniquity was found. Lucifer, the covering cherub, the bearer of light, had made his choice. But this was not a sudden eruption of rebellion. It was the culmination of a process that Jesus had watched with the patient sorrow of infinite love. Every step toward darkness had been observed by the light of the world, every choice cataloged by the one who would one day choose to bear the consequences of all wrong choices. Lucifer's rebellion was not merely an internal struggle any longer. The anointed guardian began to move through the heavenly courts with new purpose, his words dripping with the honey of deception. He whispered to other angels, painting pictures of freedom that were actually blueprints for bondage. He spoke of equality that was truly inequality, of liberation that was actually enslavement. Watch as the corruption spreads through the celestial realm like fire, consuming everything in its path. Perfect minds that had known only truth began to entertain lies. Hearts that had beat in harmony with divine love began to pulse with selfish ambition. Angels created for worship started to dream of being worshipped. A third of heaven's hosts, countless multitudes of beings crafted by the very hands of Jesus, began to turn their faces from their Creator toward the false promises of his enemy. And where was Jesus during this cosmic seduction? He remained on the eternal throne, not as a passive observer, but as the active sustainer of all existence. Every rebellious angel continued to breathe because Jesus allowed it. Every act of defiance was possible only because the Son maintained the very laws that governed their existence. The bitter irony cuts to the bone. They were rebelling against the one who gave them the power to rebel. Consider the devastating reality of this moment. Lucifer was not just turning against a distant deity. He was rejecting the very word that had spoken him into being. These angels were not merely disobeying cosmic rules. They were biting the hand that fed them, attempting to destroy the foundation upon which their own existence rested. It was like shadows trying to extinguish the light that cast them, like echoes attempting to silence the voice that created them. But Jesus understood something that the rebels could never grasp. This rebellion, as agonizing as it was to his heart of love, would serve purposes that transcended their understanding. The war that was about to explode across heaven would not be simply about power or authority. It would be about revealing the true nature of love, the meaning of genuine worship, and the foundation of authentic relationship. Then came the moment that shattered celestial peace forever. Lucifer stepped from the shadows of conspiracy into the blazing light of open rebellion. Before the very throne he once covered with reverent wings, he stood with defiance burning in his eyes and issued his declaration of war against the Almighty. His words echoed through every corner of creation, each syllable a hammer blow against the order of existence. I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the Mount of Assembly on the far sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. 5 statements of cosmic treason. 5 declarations that would change the trajectory of eternity. 5 claims that would split heaven itself and launch the most devastating war ever fought. And Jesus heard every word, not with surprise, but with the profound sadness of one who had foreseen this moment from before the foundation of the world. The response from heaven was swift and decisive, but it did not come from Jesus directly. Instead, the Son commissioned Michael, the archangel who had remained faithful, to lead the charge against the rebels. This was not because Jesus lacked the power to handle the situation himself. Quite the opposite. It was because he had a different role to play in this cosmic drama, a role that would ultimately prove far more significant than any military victory. Michael drew his sword of celestial fire, and the sound rang through eternity like a bell tolling for the end of innocence. The faithful angels rallied behind him, their faces set like flint, their hearts burning with righteous anger against those who had dared to challenge their Creator. On the other side, Lucifer spread his magnificent wings, wings that had once covered the throne in worship, now extended in warfare, and summoned his followers to battle. The war that erupted defied description. Swords of light clashed against shields of darkness. The very fabric of heavenly space trembled under the impact of supernatural combat. Angels who had once sung in perfect harmony now shouted battle cries that reverberated through dimensions yet unknown. The air itself seemed to tear as beings of pure energy collided with forces that could shatter worlds. But throughout this cosmic violence, throughout this unprecedented chaos that threatened to tear apart the very structure of existence, Jesus remained on the throne. Not hiding, not cowering, not overwhelmed by the magnitude of the conflict raging around him. He sat in perfect authority, sustaining every galaxy, every star, every planet, every atom in the universe, through the ongoing power of his word. This was his true battle. While Michael fought with angelic strength against the rebels, Jesus fought against something far more dangerous, the potential collapse of all reality. If he had stepped away from his role as sustainer for even a moment, if he had allowed his attention to be diverted from maintaining the cosmic order, everything would have ceased to exist. The war in heaven was epic, but Jesus' role was essential. Every swing of Michael's sword was powered by Jesus' sustaining grace. Every movement of the faithful angels was possible because the Son maintained the laws governing motion, energy, and force. Every victory achieved by the heavenly host was ultimately dependent on the unwavering authority of the One who spoke worlds into existence and held them in place by his will. The rebels fought valiantly, if futilely. Lucifer's brilliance had not been diminished by his rebellion. If anything, his tactical mind seemed sharpened by desperation. He deployed his forces with the skill that had once made him the most trusted of all God as servants. But skill without authority is merely noise, and authority belonged exclusively to the one against whom he fought. The outcome was never in doubt, though the battle raged with intensity that shook the foundations of reality. How could any created being, no matter how perfect, no matter how powerful, ultimately prevail against the one who created them? It was a fundamental impossibility, like a painting trying to defeat its artist, like a song attempting to silence its composer. The tide of battle turned with the inexorable force of divine justice. Michael's sword, blazing with the authority of heaven itself, cut through the ranks of rebel angels like light piercing darkness. The faithful hosts pressed forward, not with hatred in their hearts, but with the terrible certainty of those who fought for truth against deception, for order against chaos, for love against selfishness. Lucifer's forces began to crumble. These beings who had dreamed of equality with God discovered the crushing weight of their delusion. They had imagined themselves mighty enough to challenge their Creator, only to find themselves overwhelmed by the very angels who had remained faithful. The hierarchy they had rejected now became the instrument of their defeat. The authority they had scorned became the power that cast them down. But the most devastating aspect of their defeat was not the military superiority of Michael's legions. It was the gradual realization that they were fighting against the one who sustained their very existence. With every blow they struck, with every act of defiance they committed, they were rebelling against the word that held their atoms together. They were at war with the voice that kept their hearts beating, the power that allowed their minds to think, the love that had given them life itself. Jesus watched from the throne as his creation tore itself apart, and his heart grieved with a sorrow that no human language could express. These were not strangers or enemies. They were beings he had crafted with infinite care, shaped with divine love, endowed with capabilities that reflected his own nature. To see them choose destruction over blessing, rebellion over relationship, was agony beyond description. Yet his divine mind was already at work on something that the angels, faithful or fallen, could not comprehend. This war, devastating though it was, would serve as the foundation for a demonstration of love so profound, so overwhelming, that it would echo through eternity. The rebellion that seemed to threaten God's plan would actually become the catalyst for its greatest expression. As the battle raged, Jesus sustained not only the physical universe, but also the spiritual framework that would make redemption possible. He maintained the concept of justice that demanded rebellion be punished. He preserved the principle of mercy that would offer forgiveness to future sinners. He upheld the law of love that would eventually lead him to a cross on a distant world not yet created. The defeat of the rebel forces was complete and humiliating. These angels who had aspired to be like God found themselves cast out of his presence, expelled from the realm they had tried to usurp. Lucifer, once the most beautiful of all created beings, became Satan, the adversary, the accuser, the enemy of all that was good and holy and true. But their expulsion was not annihilation. Jesus could have spoken them out of existence with a single word, could have erased them from reality as though they had never been. That he chose not to do so reveals something profound about his character and his plans. Even in judgment, mercy restrained the full weight of divine wrath. Even in condemnation, love limited the extent of divine justice. The fallen angels were cast down, but they were not destroyed. They retained their intelligence, their power diminished, but not eliminated, their existence preserved for purposes they could not understand. They had chosen to leave God's presence, and God honored their choice by ensuring they could never return to pollute the holiness of heaven. Yet he did not strip them of existence itself. This decision would have consequences that rippled through time and space. The expelled rebels would not simply vanish into nothingness. They would seek new arenas for their rebellion, new victims for their deception, new ways to strike at the heart of their Creator. And Jesus knew this. He foresaw every temptation they would offer, every lie they would whisper, every soul they would try to claim. As Satan and his followers tumbled from the celestial heights, Jesus spoke words that would resonate through millennia. I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. This was not merely a statement of observation. It was a declaration of victory. The fall had been witnessed, recorded, and sealed by the highest authority in the universe. There would be no appeal, no reversal, no return to what had been lost. The speed of the fall was telling. Lightning streaks across the sky in mere moments, illuminating everything in its path before vanishing into darkness. So too was Satan's descent from the heights of glory to the depths of condemnation. One moment he stood in the presence of the Almighty. The next he was hurled into the outer darkness of separation from God. But Jesus' witness to this fall was not passive. He was not merely an observer recording events for future reference. His seeing carried weight, authority, finality. When the Son of God witnessed Satan's fall, he was simultaneously pronouncing judgment, executing sentence, and preparing for the greater victory that would one day be won through very different means. The expulsion was complete, but the war was far from over. In fact, it had only changed venues. Heaven was now pure again, cleansed of the corruption that had threatened its holiness. But the universe had gained something it had never before possessed: beings dedicated to opposing the will of their Creator, entities whose very existence was now defined by rebellion against good. Jesus rose from the throne, not to pursue the fallen angels or to gloat over their defeat, but to pronounce the final sentence that would determine their eternal destiny. This was perhaps the most solemn moment in the history of creation: the Creator standing in judgment over creatures who had chosen to reject him. The sentence was brief, definitive, and irreversible: banishment. Not temporary exile that might be lifted with good behavior, not imprisonment that could be appealed or overturned. Banishment, complete, permanent, final separation from the presence and blessing of God. They had demanded independence from divine authority. They would have it, with all its terrible consequences. Yet even in this moment of supreme justice, Jesus was already planning supreme mercy, not for the rebels who had chosen their fate with full knowledge, but for other creatures who would face similar choices with less understanding. Humanity had not yet been created, but the cross was already being prepared in the heart of God. The sentence had been pronounced. The rebels were cast out. Heaven's purity was restored. But in the heart of Jesus, something far greater was stirring, a plan so magnificent, so encompassing, that it would transform the very rebellion he had just judged into the foundation for the most stunning display of love the universe would ever witness. As the last echoes of angelic warfare faded from the celestial courts, as the faithful hosts began to restore order to the heavenly realm, Jesus revealed a truth that would shake the understanding of every created being. Lucifer's rebellion had not been a cosmic accident requiring emergency intervention. It had been a foreseen element in a plan so vast, so intricate, that even the fall of angels would serve to glorify the heart of God. The Lamb had been slain from the foundation of the world. Before Adam drew breath, before Eve opened her eyes, before the serpent slithered into Eden, Jesus had already determined to die for sins that had not yet been committed by beings who had not yet been created. Satan's rebellion had not forced God to devise a backup plan. It had revealed the eternal plan that had always been in motion. This perspective revolutionizes everything. The war in heaven was not a desperate struggle between equal forces battling for control of the universe. It was a carefully orchestrated demonstration of the infinite distance between creator and creature, designed to prepare the stage for the most magnificent revelation of divine love ever conceived. Jesus had allowed corruption to follow its natural course in Lucifer's heart, because he knew that this corruption would prepare all creation to understand the miracle of forgiveness. He had witnessed the war, knowing that this conflict would make the peace of reconciliation infinitely more precious. He had pronounced the sentence of banishment, knowing that this judgment would magnify the wonder of divine invitation to fellowship. Every aspect of the rebellion served to highlight every aspect of redemption. The pride that destroyed Lucifer would contrast sharply with the humility that would save sinners. The ambition that expelled the cherub from heaven would be overshadowed by the sacrifice that would bring the lost back home. The rebellion that resulted in spiritual death would prepare the universe to appreciate obedience that would result in eternal life. Jesus not only foresaw how Satan would attempt to corrupt the new creation he was planning, he had already determined how he would use that very attempt to demonstrate unconditional love. The same adversary who had seduced perfect angels in heaven would try to deceive imperfect humans on earth. And when he succeeded, Jesus would be ready with a solution that would leave Satan stunned and defeated. The cross was not Plan B, hastily conceived after creation went wrong. The cross was Plan A, designed before any world existed. Jesus allowed Satan to tempt the first Adam because he knew that he himself would be the second Adam, succeeding where the first had failed. He permitted the adversary to bring death into the world because he intended to bring abundant life. He allowed sin to enter creation because he planned to enter creation himself to remove sin forever. This understanding reveals why Jesus had remained on the throne during the heavenly rebellion instead of descending to fight personally. His true battle against Satan would be fought in an entirely different dimension, not through superior force, but through superior love. Michael had defeated Satan with an angelic sword. Jesus would defeat him with divine sacrifice. The archangel had expelled the adversary from heaven through military might. The Savior would expel him from human hearts through moral transformation. Michael's victory was external and temporary. Satan was banished from the heavenly courts, but retained access as an accuser. Jesus' victory would be internal and eternal. Satan would forever lose any legal claim over repentant hearts. The difference between the two victories would be the difference between a battle won and a war concluded. But there was another dimension to this cosmic drama that even the faithful angels struggled to comprehend. Jesus had not only planned to redeem future sinners, he had determined to create them in such a way that their redemption would bring him greater glory than if they had never fallen at all. The love that would be demonstrated in saving rebels would surpass the love that had been shown in creating the innocent. This truth explains why the angelic hosts look with wonder upon the salvation of human souls. They had witnessed the creation of worlds, the formation of galaxies, the birth of countless species. They had seen the rebellion of their fellow angels and the justice that followed. But they had never seen anything like the love that would be displayed when the Creator became a creature to save other creatures. Satan thought he understood the rules of the cosmic conflict. Power opposed power. Authority challenged authority. Strength battled strength. He had no category for what Jesus was planning. Weakness that would prove stronger than all strength. Humility that would tower over all pride. Sacrifice that would conquer all selfishness. The expelled adversary began to plot his next moves, seeking new venues for his rebellion, new victims for his deceptions. He had lost the war in heaven, but he was determined to win battles on earth. What he did not realize was that every battle he thought he was winning would actually advance the ultimate victory of the one he opposed. Jesus watched Satan's scheming with the calm confidence of one who sees the end from the beginning. Every temptation the adversary would offer would serve to reveal the depths of divine love. Every lie he would whisper would highlight the beauty of divine truth. Every soul he would try to claim would become an opportunity for grace to triumph over judgment. The stage was being set for the greatest drama ever performed. Heaven had been purged of rebellion, but earth would become the theater where rebellion and redemption would play out their eternal conflict. And in the end, the victory would belong not to the one who fought with greatest force, but to the one who loved with greatest sacrifice. Time moved forward with divine purpose. The expelled angels found themselves in a realm they had never known before, existence, without the direct presence of God. No longer could they walk in the courts of heaven. No longer could they bask in the unfiltered glory of the Almighty. They had demanded independence from divine authority, and they had received it, along with all its terrible consequences. Satan, once Lucifer the light-bearer, now found himself the prince of darkness, ruling over a kingdom of shadows he had never wanted. The freedom he had craved proved to be the most devastating form of bondage. He was free from God's immediate presence, but also free from God's immediate blessing. Free from divine authority, but also free from divine protection. Free from the constraints of holiness, but also free from the joy that holiness brings. Yet in his twisted heart, the adversary was not finished. If he could not rule in heaven, he would make sure that God's other creations knew the same corruption he had chosen. If he could not be like the Most High, he would ensure that others would follow his path of rebellion. If he could not ascend divine heights, he would drag as many as possible down to his depths of despair. And Jesus watched it all, knowing that Satan's very attempts at destruction would become opportunities for construction. that his efforts to damn would become occasions to save, that his work of tearing down would set the stage for the greatest building up ever accomplished. The time came for the next phase of the eternal plan. God spoke new words of creation, but these were different from the words that had formed the angels. These words brought forth matter and energy, space and time, galaxies and stars, planets and moons. The physical universe exploded into existence with a beauty that rivaled the spiritual realm, a complexity that reflected the mind of its maker, a vastness that proclaimed the glory of God to any who would observe and understand. And on one small planet in an unremarkable solar system in an ordinary galaxy, something extraordinary was prepared. A world perfect in every detail, designed specifically for beings who had not yet been created, beings who would be like the angels in their spiritual nature, but unlike them in their physical form. Creatures who would bear the very image of God while dwelling in bodies fashioned from the dust of the earth. Satan watched the creation of this new world with growing understanding and mounting rage. He recognized the divine artistry at work. He saw the careful preparation, the loving attention to detail, the obvious intention to populate this realm with beings who would enjoy intimate fellowship with their Creator. And he understood that this was his opportunity for revenge against the one who had cast him out of heaven. When Adam and Eve were formed and placed in the Garden of Eden, Satan saw in them everything he had lost and could never regain. They walked with God in the cool of the day. They enjoyed unbroken fellowship with their Creator. They possessed the innocence he had corrupted, the purity he had defiled, the relationship he had destroyed. They were what he had been before pride had poisoned his perfect heart. But they were also something he had never been, physical beings with physical temptations, created with less knowledge than he had possessed, placed in circumstances that offered opportunities for deception that had never existed in heaven. If he could corrupt these new creatures, if he could lead them into the same rebellion that had destroyed him, he would strike a blow against God that would wound the Creator's heart. Jesus knew Satan's thoughts before the adversary formed them. He understood the temptation that would come, the deception that would be offered, the choice that would be presented to humanity. And yet he allowed the serpent enter the garden, permitted the conversation with Eve, watched as the forbidden fruit was taken and eaten. Why? Because this too was part of the plan that would ultimately bring greater glory to God than if the fall had never occurred. The fall of man was different from the fall of angels in crucial ways. Lucifer had rebelled with full knowledge, perfect understanding, and complete awareness of the consequences. Adam and Eve fell through deception, limited understanding, and trust in a lie. Their sin was real and devastating, but it was also forgivable in ways that angelic rebellion was not. When the first humans chose to disobey God's command, Satan thought he had achieved the ultimate victory. He had succeeded where he had failed with the faithful angels. He had corrupted God's newest creation, brought sin and death into the physical realm, established a foothold for his kingdom of darkness on God's perfect earth. In his twisted mind, he had evened the score for his expulsion from heaven. But Satan's celebration was premature. In the very moment that he thought he had defeated God's plan, he had actually set in motion the fulfillment of God's greatest purpose. The fall of humanity would become the occasion for the demonstration of divine love that would echo through eternity. The sin that seemed to separate creation from Creator would become the bridge for the most intimate union ever achieved between God and his creatures. Jesus stepped forward with the promise that would change everything. The seed of the woman shall bruise the serpent. Said, this was not merely a prediction of future victory. It was a declaration of present intention. The Son of God was announcing his plan to enter the very realm that Satan thought he had claimed to take on, the very nature that Satan had corrupted to win the very victory that Satan thought he had prevented. The promise was cryptic, but its meaning was clear to those with eyes to see. God himself would become man. The Creator would enter his creation. The Word would become flesh and dwell among those he had made. And in doing so, he would accomplish what no angel could achieve, the complete and final defeat of sin, death, and Satan himself. Satan had won a battle, but he was about to discover that the war was far from over. In fact, his apparent victory had only prepared the way for his ultimate defeat. The very sin he had introduced would become the occasion for grace to triumph. The death he had brought would be overcome by life. The separation he had caused would be healed by reconciliation. Jesus had remained on the throne during Lucifer's sin because he knew his true battle would be fought as a man on earth. He had witnessed Satan's fall like lightning because he knew his own descent to earth would result in Satan as permanent expulsion from the hearts of the redeemed. Centuries rolled by like waves upon the shore of eternity. Humanity multiplied and spread across the earth, carrying within their hearts both the image of God and the stain of sin. Some sought their Creator with genuine hearts and found him faithful. Others turned away, pursuing the paths of rebellion that Satan was all too eager to illuminate. The adversary moved through human history like a shadow, whispering lies into receptive ears, tempting hearts toward the same pride that had been his downfall. But through it all, Jesus remained actively engaged in the unfolding drama. He was not a distant deity observing human struggle from afar. He walked with Enoch. He spoke with Abraham. He wrestled with Jacob. He appeared to Moses in the burning bush. Again and again, the eternal Son stepped into human experience, preparing hearts for the ultimate revelation that was to come. Each divine encounter was a preview of the incarnation, a foreshadowing of the moment when God would not merely visit humanity, but become humanity. Every appearance, every intervention, every miracle was a thread in the tapestry being woven toward the supreme moment when the Creator would enter his creation in the most intimate way possible. Satan watched these divine interventions with growing unease. He recognized the pattern, sensed the building momentum, felt the cosmic forces aligning towards something that would threaten his temporary kingdom. Each time God appeared to human beings, each time heaven touched earth, the adversary felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Something was coming, something that would change everything. The prophets began to speak with increasing clarity about a coming deliverer. Isaiah spoke of a child who would be born, a son who would be given, whose name would be Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Micah prophesied that from Bethlehem would come forth one who would be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth had been from of old, from everlasting. Daniel saw one like the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven and receiving dominion and glory and a kingdom. Each prophecy was like a hammer blow against Satan's confidence. The picture they painted was not of a merely human deliverer, but of God himself coming to dwell among men. The adversary had defeated human beings in the garden, but now he would face their Creator wearing human flesh. The implications were staggering and terrifying. Then came the night that changed everything. In the little town of Bethlehem, in a stable that reeked of animals and hay, surrounded by the humble and the forgotten, the impossible became reality. The Word became flesh. The Creator entered his creation. The Son of God became the Son of Man. Jesus, the same Jesus who had created Lucifer in the fires of eternity, who had witnessed his rebellion, who had sustained the universe during the war in heaven, who had pronounced sentence upon the fallen angels, now lay helpless as a human infant, dependent upon a teenage mother for his very survival. The one who had commanded galaxies now cried for milk. The voice that had spoken worlds into existence now made the wordless sounds of babyhood. Satan could hardly believe what he was witnessing. The Almighty God had made himself vulnerable in ways that defied understanding. Here was the Creator in a form that could be threatened, hurt, even killed. Here was infinite power wrapped in finite flesh, eternal authority confined in temporal limitations, divine glory veiled in human weakness. For the first time since his rebellion, Satan felt something approaching hope. If he could destroy this child, if he could eliminate Jesus before he could accomplish whatever purpose had brought him to earth, then perhaps his defeat in heaven could be reversed. Perhaps his banishment could be overturned. Perhaps he could still achieve the victory that had eluded him in the celestial courts. He moved immediately to action, working through King Herod to slaughter the innocents of Bethlehem. But the infant Jesus was already gone, carried by his earthly parents to safety in Egypt. The adversary's first attempt at infanticide had failed, but he was far from finished. He would have other opportunities, other strategies, other chances to strike at the heart of God's plan. Jesus grew in wisdom and stature, in favor with God and men. But Satan watched every step, waiting for the moment when he could achieve his ultimate revenge. The boy became a man. The son of a carpenter became a rabbi. A child of Mary became the Christ of God. And still the adversary waited, planning, scheming, preparing for the confrontation that would determine the fate of the universe. When Jesus began his public ministry, Satan struck with all the subtlety and power at his disposal. In the wilderness, after 40 days of fasting, when the Son of God was at his weakest physically, the adversary offered 3 temptations designed to corrupt the very mission that had brought Jesus to earth. The first temptation appealed to physical need. If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become bread. It seemed reasonable enough. Use divine power to meet legitimate human need. But Jesus recognized the trap. To act independently of the Father's will, even for good purposes, would be to repeat the very sin that had corrupted Lucifer. The response was swift and decisive. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. The second temptation appealed to presumption. If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from the pinnacle of the temple, for it is written, He shall give His angels charge over you. Satan was actually quoting Scripture, but twisting it for evil purposes. He was suggesting that Jesus force God's hand, manipulate circumstances for dramatic effect, test the Father's faithfulness unnecessarily. Again, Jesus cut through the deception with the sword of truth. It is written again, You shall not tempt the Lord your God. The third temptation was the most audacious of all. Satan showed Jesus all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, then made an offer that revealed his desperate ambition. All these things I will give you if you will fall down and worship me. Here was the rebellion of Lucifer laid bare, the desire to be worshipped rather than to worship, to receive glory rather than to give it, to be served rather than to serve. Jesus' response carried the full weight of divine authority. Away with you, Satan! For it is written, You shall worship the Lord your God, and him only you shall serve. Satan departed, but only until an opportune time. He had failed in direct confrontation, but he would try other approaches, subtler methods, more cunning strategies. He would work through religious leaders to oppose Jesus' teaching. He would use political authorities to threaten his life. He would even work through Jesus' own disciples to discourage and deflect him from his mission. But with each failed attempt, Satan was actually advancing the very plan he sought to destroy. Every opposition only clarified Jesus' purpose more clearly. Every attack only demonstrated his victory more powerfully. Every scheme of the adversary only served to reveal more fully the wisdom and love of God. The ministry of Jesus unfolded with divine purpose and perfect timing. Everywhere he went, the kingdom of darkness retreated. Demons cried out in terror at his presence, recognizing the authority that had once cast them from heaven. Diseases fled at his touch. Death itself yielded to his command. The very creation that Satan thought he had claimed responded with joy to the presence of its creator. But Satan's most devastating realization was not the power that Jesus displayed. It was the love he demonstrated. The adversary had spent millennia convincing himself that God was a tyrant, that divine authority was harsh and unforgiving, that the Creator cared more about rules than relationships. Yet here was Jesus, dining with tax collectors and sinners, showing compassion to the outcasts, offering hope to the hopeless. Every act of mercy was a blow against Satan's propaganda. Every word of forgiveness was a contradiction of his lies. Every demonstration of love was proof that he had misunderstood the very nature of the God he had rebelled against. The Creator he had portrayed as a demanding dictator was revealing himself as a loving Father, seeking not the destruction of rebels, but their redemption. As Jesus' ministry progressed, Satan began to understand with growing horror that his expulsion from heaven had not been motivated by petty jealousy or threatened ego. It had been an act of love, love for the creatures who remained faithful, love for the creation that needed protection from corruption, love for the very rebels themselves who were being shielded from the full consequences of their choices until mercy could make its offer. The more Jesus revealed about the heart of God, the more Satan realized how completely he had misjudged the situation. He had thought he was fighting against a God who demanded worship out of insecurity. In reality, he had rebelled against a God who desired relationship out of love. He had imagined he was challenging a tyrant who ruled through fear. Instead, he had rejected a Father who led through sacrifice. But Satan's pride would not allow him to acknowledge his error. Instead of repenting, he doubled down on his rebellion. If he could not corrupt Jesus through temptation, he would destroy him through suffering. If he could not turn the Son against the Father, he would use the Father's love for the Son as a weapon against both. The adversary began to mobilize every force at his disposal against Jesus. Religious leaders who should have recognized their Messiah instead plotted his death. Political authorities who should have protected the innocent instead conspired with his enemies. Even one of Jesus' own disciples, Judas Iscariot, became an instrument of betrayal in Satan's hands. As the opposition intensified, as the plots thickened, as the hour of crisis approached, Satan felt something approaching the confidence he had lost in heaven. Surely God would not allow his own Son to be tortured and killed. Surely the Father would intervene to protect the one he claimed to love. Surely this plan, whatever it was, would collapse when pushed to its ultimate extreme. But Jesus moved toward Jerusalem and the cross with steady determination. He spoke increasingly of his coming death, not as a defeat to be avoided, but as a victory to be achieved. He talked about laying down his life voluntarily, about no one taking it from him, about having the power to lay it down and the power to take it up again. His words made no sense to Satan's twisted logic. Then came the night of betrayal, arrest, and trial. Satan watched with growing excitement as Jesus was bound, beaten, mocked, and condemned. Here was the Son of God rendered powerless, apparently abandoned by the Father he claimed to represent. Here was the Creator being destroyed by his own creation. Here was the ultimate proof that Satan's rebellion had been justified all along. The next morning, Jesus was nailed to a cross between two thieves. Satan looked upon the scene with something approaching triumph. The one who had cast him from heaven now hung helpless on a tree. The voice that had sustained the universe was reduced to gasps of pain. The hands that had formed galaxies were pierced with nails. The one who claimed to be life itself was dying. In the adversary's mind, this was vindication for everything he had done. God was not invincible after all. The Creator could be defeated by his creatures. The rebellion that had begun in heaven was finally being completed on earth. Satan had won the ultimate victory by destroying God himself. But as Jesus hung on the cross, as the sky darkened and the earth shook, as the very foundations of creation seemed to tremble, something was happening that Satan did not understand. This was not the defeat of God's plan. This was its fulfillment. This was not the failure of divine love. This was its greatest expression. This was not Satan's triumph. This was his doom being sealed with the blood of the Lamb. Jesus cried out, "It is finished." And Satan thought he meant his life was over. In reality, Jesus meant that the work of redemption was complete. The adversary thought he was witnessing the death of God. Actually, he was witnessing the death of sin itself. Satan believed he was achieving his ultimate revenge. Instead, he was accomplishing his own ultimate defeat. For 3 days, Satan celebrated. The one who had been his greatest enemy was dead and buried. The plan that had threatened his kingdom was apparently in ruins. The love that had exposed his lies was silenced forever. He had finally achieved the victory that had eluded him since his rebellion in heaven. But on the 3rd day, everything changed. The tomb was empty. Jesus was alive. Death itself had been conquered. And Satan realized with crushing horror that he had been played, that his apparent victory had been his actual defeat, that his moment of triumph had been his hour of doom, that his greatest success had been his ultimate failure. The cross was not the end of God's plan. It was the completion of it. Jesus had not been defeated by death. He had defeated death. Satan had not won the war. He had sealed his own eternal condemnation. The one who had witnessed his fall like lightning from heaven had now accomplished his fall like an avalanche, permanent and irreversible. The resurrection changed everything. In a single moment, in the twinkling of an eye, the entire cosmic balance shifted dramatically and permanently. Satan, who had thought himself victorious, discovered that he had been utterly and completely defeated. Jesus, whom he had thought dead, stood alive and triumphant, holding the keys of death and hell in his nail-scarred hands. The adversary's schemes lay in ruins around him. Every lie he had told was exposed by the truth of the empty tomb. Every deception he had woven was unraveled by the reality of resurrection power. Every victory he had claimed was revealed as merely a temporary setback in God's eternal plan. Satan had not won anything. He had simply played his assigned role in the greatest demonstration of divine love ever conceived. The cross, which had seemed like God's defeat, was actually Satan's destruction. The death that had appeared to silence, the voice of love, was actually the shout of victory that would echo through eternity. The suffering that had looked like weakness was actually the strength that would draw all people to Jesus. The apparent failure was actually the success that would redeem countless millions from the kingdom of darkness. Jesus had accomplished what no army could achieve, what no angel could perform, what no human effort could complete. He had satisfied the demands of justice while demonstrating the fullness of mercy. He had paid the penalty for sin while preserving the freedom of choice. He had defeated Satan while offering salvation to sinners. He had resolved the cosmic conflict while revealing the heart of God, the one who had remained on the throne during. Lucifer, as rebellion, had descended from that throne to win the war that really mattered. The Creator who had witnessed Satan's fall like lightning had accomplished Satan's defeat like an earthquake, shaking the foundations of hell itself and setting the captives free. The Son who had allowed rebellion to run its course had now provided redemption for rebels who wanted to come home. Satan's accusations were silenced forever. He could no longer point to human sin as evidence of God's failure, because God had taken that sin upon himself. He could no longer claim that divine justice was unmerciful, because mercy and justice had met at the cross. He could no longer argue that God demanded what creatures could not give, because God had given what creatures could never earn. The adversary's power was broken, his authority revoked, his future sealed. He remained active, continuing to deceive those who chose deception, to tempt those who welcomed temptation, to destroy those who rejected salvation. But his ultimate defeat was assured, his final judgment certain, his eternal condemnation irrevocable. Meanwhile, the gospel message began to spread like wildfire across the earth. The same Jesus who had created Lucifer, who had witnessed his rebellion, who had sustained the universe during the war in heaven, who had pronounced sentence upon the fallen angels, was now offering forgiveness to fallen humans. The Creator was inviting his creatures back into fellowship. The judge was becoming the justifier. The one who had expelled Satan from heaven was opening heaven to sinners. Every person who accepted Jesus' offer of salvation became a living testimony to Satan's defeat. Every transformed life was proof of resurrection power. Every redeemed heart was evidence of divine love. Every forgiven sinner was a celebration of grace triumphant. The kingdom of darkness was being plundered, and its captives were being set free. The same Jesus who had remained on the throne during the cosmic rebellion continues to reign today. He sustains the universe by his word of power. He sees every struggle, every temptation, every moment of doubt that his people face. He knows every scheme that Satan devises, every trap the adversary sets, every lie the deceiver whispers. And he continues to provide the strength, the wisdom, and the grace needed for victory. Satan still roams like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. But he is a defeated enemy, his fangs pulled, his power broken, his destiny sealed. He can harm no one who takes refuge in the name of Jesus. He cannot touch anyone who is covered by the blood of the Lamb. He has no claim on those who have been purchased by the cross and raised by resurrection power. The question that echoed through eternity, where was Jesus during Lucifer's rebellion, has been answered in the most magnificent way possible. He was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what needed to be done, allowing exactly what needed to happen, all to prepare the way for the greatest demonstration of love the universe would ever witness. Jesus was on the throne during Satan's rebellion, and he remains on the throne today. He was in control then, and he is in control now. He had a plan then, and that plan has been perfectly executed. The rebellion that seemed to threaten God's purposes actually served to reveal them more fully. The war that appeared to divide heaven actually united it more completely. The fall that looked like defeat actually prepared the way for the greatest victory ever won. Today, if you feel overwhelmed by the battles you face, remember that the same Jesus who defeated Satan in the cosmic war has already won the victory in your personal struggles. If you feel condemned by your failures, remember that the judge who expelled the adversary from heaven has become the Savior who invites sinners home. If you feel powerless against temptation, remember that the one who sustained the universe during heavenly chaos can sustain you through earthly trials. The greatest battle ever fought has already been won. The mightiest enemy ever faced has already been defeated. The most devastating rebellion ever attempted has already been turned into the foundation for the most beautiful redemption ever offered. Jesus has triumphed completely and eternally, and his victory is available to everyone who calls upon his name. Where was Jesus during Lucifer's rebellion? He was right where he needed to be, preparing the way for your salvation. And where is he today? Right where he needs to be, ready to save all who come to him in faith, hope, and love. The war is over. The victory is won. Jesus reigns supreme, now and forever.